Welcome, everyone, to AURI Connect's Webinar Wednesday, part of AURI Connect's monthly online series featuring updates on the work that AURI is doing to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products. I'm Dan Scogin, your host on Webinar Wednesdays. The AURI Connects program is hosted by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota, with sponsorship from Bremer Bank, and by the Main Street businesses focused on food and agriculture, the MBFFA initiative. Through a collaborative approach to small business recovery and resiliency, MBFFA is reducing barriers to access for entrepreneurs seeking customized consulting and training services. You can learn more about their network of experts ready to help you get connected, drive solutions, and grow your business venture at the link provided. It's funded in part through a grant with the U.S. Small Business Administration. Now, this program aims to actively engage all participants in the food and ag industry to improve competitiveness of producers, businesses, and entrepreneurs through ongoing purposeful connection of resources and partners along the value chain, and increased knowledge of opportunities, technologies, and trends. Remember, this event is being recorded and archived and can be found at auri.org. Remember that you will be muted during our presentations, but you can send us your written questions through the Q&A portal on your screen. Today, we begin a three-part series devoted to the latest developments, initiatives, and challenges in the Upper Midwest's thriving sustainable proteins industry. Joining the discussion today will be Shannon Schlecht, Adam Matula, and Joanne Berkenkamp. Shannon Schlecht is the Executive Director of AURI and is responsible for the overall strategic and operational oversight of the organization's staff, its programs, and the execution of its mission. AURI provides technical services to businesses, conducts applied research initiatives, and convenes networking events to create value-added economic opportunities for the food and agriculture sector. Adam Matula is an engagement manager of McKinsey & Company and a leader in their sustainability practice. His work focuses on the intersection of sustainability and growth strategy with a large focus on agriculture. He's worked on agriculture projects ranging from nutrient reduction plans and alternative protein growth strategies to helping input manufacturers reduce their carbon footprint, and is passionate about finding ways to improve our ability to feed 8 billion plus people sustainably. And joining us today, Joanne Berkenkamp, the Managing Director of MBOLD. MBOLD, a coalition of major Minnesota-based food and ag company executives and innovators working collaboratively to address sustainability and climate issues in the food and ag sector. Joanne has 2 decades of experience working at the nexus of the food, agriculture, and environmental sectors in a variety of domestic and international contexts. He's worked extensively in food supply chain development, sustainable agriculture, environmental conservation, regional food systems, and food waste reduction. She also has a background in corporate finance and has worked in the international development field in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We're looking forward to this discussion today, so let's get started with part 1 in our 3-part series. Shannon Schlecht, welcome to today's Webinar Wednesday.
Hey, thank you, Dan, for that introduction, and it's great to be with you today. And it's a pleasure to be joined by Adam and Joanne today to talk about protein sustainability and activities that are underway and just the importance of this topic overall. I think we all agree that protein is a very important topic to be discussing in relation to food and agriculture, its importance as part of our diet, and and just the importance to the Minnesota economy as well as we look at our food and agricultural sector. So we've been working and looking at protein for the last couple of years through the MBOLD Coalition, and just looking for opportunities that we could advance and to better understand, what's happening and where could the coalition be impactful. AURI is part of the MBOLD Coalition, and I've been working with the team on helping to scope this out and identify opportunities as well. So going back just a few years. In 2021, our Bold Open challenges that we implemented and put forth really were focused on protein. We had 10 challenges that year. I think 7 of those 10 were really focused on protein sustainability and really helping look at what Minnesota entities were doing and how we could help advance and explore some of those protein sustainability innovations and solutions that might exist out there. And then just at AURI in general, we've had several protein topics that we've covered from client work focused on feed ingredients to we've had some insect projects as well that have come through our portfolio. And then we're involved just in a wide range of different activities or ecosystem partners as well, whether it be through the University of Minnesota and the Plant Protein Innovation Center, whether it's through Biomade and our membership there. And then just some of our work as well with USDA on local and regional meat processing and what's happening with our traditional protein suppliers in that space. So lots of things happening. It's great to be here to talk about it today and to just look at these different areas and kind of provide an overview for what we'll dig into later on throughout this protein series. Before I get started, again, thank you to Joanne and Adam for their efforts and the partnership here on moving this forward and just having this discussion today. So I'll maybe just start out in terms of why protein. And as we look at what's happening in the world, some of the early scoping that you think about when we look at demand really is this interest in health and wellness. And to a lot of individuals, health and wellness really does put a large emphasis on protein. And we know that protein demand is growing, right? As we think about the 2050 numbers that we've all heard about in terms of the billions more people that we need to feed as we continue to go forward with population growth. We haven't really, dug into what are those different components of the calories that are going to be needed. And I think this chart does a great job in terms of looking at the growth in protein or the expected supply that will be needed to meet that demand that's forthcoming. And as we look at what's happening, as people have more income from a per capita level, and as the population grows, and as they look at health and wellness, we see protein demand growing much greater than overall caloric demand overall. So at least a minimum of two times greater than what we see in other categories when you think about the large categories that exist as we look at our diets. So that is why protein is such an interesting and important topic for us to be talking about in terms of innovation, in terms of sustainability opportunities and looking at that going forward. And then emissions are another element, and Adam will dig in more to that in the next segment here in terms of why is sustainability so important from protein. And I think it lays it out here in terms of, right, agriculture is a generator of emissions and greenhouse gases, and there's a lot of work and effort being done in terms of looking at that in our carbon intensity and insets and offsets with carbon and other areas that we could create new economic opportunities, as well as doing something good for the planet as we look at agriculture production and being a solution in many cases to the challenges that we face. And of course, just feeding the world, right, is such an important part of this, and how do we do it in a more sustainable manner. And then last I'll just point out here is, why Minnesota? And I'll dig into that a little bit more as we get further into a few slides. But Minnesota is a leader in so many cases as we look at our production that we have here from crops. We look at our number of livestock that's produced here and just that mix of the diversity of agriculture. And right, just that historic presence that we have as an epicenter for food and agriculture. So excited to be talking about that here and looking at how do all these pieces start to come together. So what do we mean by protein? I think is where I'll start here. This is protein's broad as we think about it, right? We've got different types of protein. We've got the value chain touch points on protein as well. And maybe just for like a high level in terms of the different elements of protein, traditional protein or a livestock protein that we've typically thought about, right? That would be our dairy, our swine, beef and poultry industries and broilers, right? And just, they're doing a lot of work and looking at their sustainability footprints and how can they be more sustainable and look at more circular approaches. I think of our Egg Innovator of the Year last year was Asmus Farms, an egg laying operation, really looking at how do we close some of those gaps around circular approaches and be more sustainable as producers. We've got aquaculture, right, which is growing fish farming basically, right? There's a lot of fish farming around the world. Here we think mainly of recreational fishing, right, but also of indoor aquaculture in terms of shrimp and tilapia, right? There's trout farms that are popping up. There's salmon farms, right? And just I know there's a company here looking at indoor walleye production as well, right? And how do those contribute to the protein demand and meeting that in a more sustainable manner when we look at conversion rates of inputs to outputs of protein? And then you've got a lot of work going on in the innovation around feed ingredients and new feed opportunities. Everything from more climate-friendly crops in terms of what is their role as a feed, and in terms of into that ratio that we think about as soybean meal and DDGs and wheat midds and other things. What do some of these new crops contribute in terms of that nutritional profile, and how do they fit in, and how do they help with the efficiency of livestock production? To then supplements, right, that may exist, and additives for feed that can help reduce enteric methane, right, and just to increase those efficiency opportunities and get the right amino acids that are needed, for protein production. And then you have plant protein, right, which we've heard a lot about in terms of what's happening with field peas, soybeans, dry edible beans, and different opportunities for those crops. As we look at meat analogs and into protein powders and isolates and concentrates as ingredients, as well as into functional beverages in different ways that consumers look at getting their protein through different opportunities and through those sustainable plant proteins. And then alternative proteins, I put as its own separate category here, as I think about insect protein that we hear about, but we don't see a lot yet here in Minnesota. But what is the opportunity there as a feed ingredient, as well as into different food products as well, in terms of looking at waste streams and circular approaches again for protein production, and then fungi or mushroom, right, that we can put into different ingredients as well. And then one that's pretty interesting to me is precision fermentation, which is looking at different feedstocks and using biology in terms of creating a very tailored or specific ingredients that can be put into food use or into feed use. When you think about what are those right amino acid profiles, that how can you create that in a more tailored manner for early stage diets, right, for different animal species, or for later stage, and how does that work and look, and how can you create more circular approaches using microbiology versus our typical thoughts of mechanical processing. Obviously mechanical processing still needed to put that all together. And then the last being cellular proteins, and this is really looking at cellular techniques and utilizing the cells from animals to create finished products versus looking at the slaughter of animals for those different products. So lots of things happening in the protein space, and a lot of areas that are ripe for innovation as we look at this area of protein sustainability. Let me just go forward here on Minnesota overall in terms of the powerhouse that it is in terms of production of both inputs into protein as well as right, our animal inventories and animal supplies that we have here. You can see the numbers here in terms of 52 million was the number of head of animals that were in Minnesota, right, when we look across the various spectrums of poultry, swine, cattle. So just a large inventory and a very important segment of our agricultural ecosystem here. And then 18 million in crop production as well. And I'll dig into a few more specifics, but there's just a lot that's happening here from a production standpoint, as well as in a value-added standpoint. We look across the value chain and how it all has to work in terms of innovations to move forward and to really make an impact from the producer, right, to the consumer, and all that processing in the middle of the supply chain that occurs. So just looking briefly at Minnesota's crop production and getting a little bit more specific here, corn and soybeans are by far the two major crops that are produced here. Both very important inputs as we look at protein production in terms of a feed ingredient, whether it be directly fed or after processing, right, as dried distillers goods from ethanol production to soybean meal from oilseed processing, right, or isolates and concentrates of different variations there as well. So that's roughly 85% of acreage is dedicated to those crops in Minnesota when you look at the overall landscape. And then you have the alfalfa and the mixed forages, which is really important to, right, our beef industry, our dairy industry, in terms of those crops and what's being done with them in terms of being a sustainable feed input into those operations as well. And then you can see the rest of the categories there that we produce in Minnesota. And then as we look at animal inventory, I mentioned the macro number earlier. This is a little bit about how it breaks down from the types of livestock inventory or livestock production that we have in Minnesota. So you can see chicken and turkeys, large numbers of production that exist in the state. And then swine being the next segment in terms of number of head raised or produced within the state. So two very large segments for us, right? Turkeys were number one. We've got a large chicken broiler, facilities and operations here as well. But also very important to Minnesota are the beef cattle, the dairy cattle, in terms of that segment, the economic value that it brings to the state and to our producers as we look across Minnesota. And then maybe just looking at this in one other manner would be our agricultural marketing value. So we look at the importance of our crops, roughly 60%, right, and our marketing value from livestock being roughly 40%. And you can see, even though our numbers in poultry are high, right, the value, the marketing value for hogs and dairy being much higher as we look at that from a different perspective, right, from production to marketing value. And then you can see where Minnesota ranks in certain categories as we think about protein and the importance of protein to our agricultural industry. And then the other element here is so why in Minnesota? I think I touched on a lot of that in the previous slides. We've got the production. There's the ability to be close to the production, which is important for that value-added processing and that next step. And we've also got great ecosystem partners, and then we've got the other value chain players here as well. All right, we've got plant protein companies. We've got a large, processors when you think about the landscape. We've got great feed suppliers here as well, are doing innovative work in feed ingredients. We've got very progressive and forward-looking trade associations and agricultural organizations that are, active in the space and looking to really move the needle on certain areas. Right, and then just some of these ecosystem support partners as well that exist here that are focused on protein and really trying to move forward. And then I think it's important to note that right, there's a lot of talk on agritech and animal agriculture, but really no region has claimed itself as the epicenter for protein innovation yet in protein sustainability. And I think there's an opportunity there for us, and I know you'll hear more about that as we hear from our other panelists and as we go through this series as well. So we're just seeing, as we look at what's happening here, we're seeing that same interest, right, not just from Minnesota companies, but from more broadly in terms of what's happening around protein innovations and connecting and having those opportunities to really try to excel around what is happening around protein innovation and protein sustainability. So that was meant to kind of set the stage around why protein, what's happening in protein, what is the opportunity as we look forward for the next several years around protein. And now I'm happy to turn it over to Adam to talk more around the sustainability pieces and the work that's been done in that area, to hear more about what is happening, or what are some levers and opportunities as we think about protein and the sustainability and meeting that global demand for protein in a more sustainable manner. So Adam, happy to hand it over to you, and look forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Shannon, and hello, everyone. I'm really excited to share with you some of the more detailed research on agricultural sustainability and, critically, why innovation is an important piece of the future of proteins, both globally as well as for the United States, and some reasons why we might be excited about it in Minnesota in particular. So first, to sort of set the global context for agriculture and sustainability, according to the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, or FAO, agriculture represents about 20% of all greenhouse gas emissions, with the lion's share of that coming from protein production. And this is not even including the effects of land use change and certain types of agroforestry behaviors. So you may notice the figures here are perhaps a little bit lower than what Shannon shared up front, but those being the primary drivers. The data here includes everything from carbon dioxide from energy use and fossil fuels to power agricultural equipment, to nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer applications, as well as methane from livestock, which is disproportionately harmful in the short term, with something on the order of 80 times as much climate change impact as carbon dioxide on a per ton basis. If we do nothing, and with the current trends both in population and demand for protein and calories, we might expect, rather than sort of a reduction in the overall emissions that would be needed to keep the world on a favorable climate change trajectory, we would actually expect to see something on the order of a 15 or 20% increase in the total emissions stemming from agriculture by 2050. Again, the majority of which are coming from protein production, which sort of sets up or underscores the importance of protein as a particular focus when it comes to agricultural sustainability. If we zoom in on the United States and our protein consumption in particular, what we see is that Americans consume something on the order of 3 times as much meat as the rest of the world per person on a daily basis, and maybe a quarter less protein from plants. This being particularly relevant from a sustainability lens because animal protein production is about 15 to 20 times or more impactful in terms of greenhouse gas intensivity and production than plant proteins, for example. Which leaves us with kind of 2 primary ways of thinking about reducing the sustainability impact or the climate change impact of protein production. You can imagine doing your best to change consumer preferences in favor of plant proteins and alternative proteins, or alternatively finding ways to reduce the impact of animal agricultural production, and more likely trying to tackle both of these in tandem to the extent that we can. Starting with the first option and taking a little bit of a look at alternative proteins, it's clear that certain types of animal protein alternatives have significantly lower emissions footprints, particularly, say, vegetarian options or some of the insect-based emerging options that Shannon had mentioned in his presentation. However, consumer preferences are strong and difficult to change, particularly when it comes to these alternatives around taste, texture, and quite frankly, cost, as we've seen a number of the alternative protein options being significantly more expensive for the average consumer than some of the alternatives. This is, as you might expect, then reflected in the levels of consumer acceptance we see today. And one way to articulate this from a global perspective is to look at just the total markets for protein products across the world. Alternative proteins are only about 2% of that global markets, and while we're expecting to see additional uptake and faster growth, maybe something 10, 20, 30% a year annually, which is a lot higher than what we might see in traditional proteins, 1, 2, 2.5%. There's a very long way to go before they become, a particularly substantial portion of the broader picture here. That's not to say that we haven't made significant progress sort of along the way, and I do want to spend a moment here to kind of highlight that. So if you take a look, from the chart here at historical U.S. agricultural production output, and you compare it to the amount of land that we used and the energy that we used, to get to those outputs, you might see what I think some people will find is a surprising picture, namely that we've managed to consistently increase agriculture output, something on the order of 2% a year for more than 50 years here, while at the same time reducing the amount of land and more recently, the amount of energy we need to actually achieve those outputs. This is a testament to kind of meaningful technological improvements and innovation along the way, but based on some of the other data we've seen, it's clear that there's a lot left to do. When we take a look at opportunities then to reduce animal protein emissions and make it more sustainable, we basically have come up with what we have here as sort of 7 broader categories or buckets of opportunities. And I won't discuss, the full list here in detail, but you can imagine these options as proven opportunities, things that we know will work, that we've seen work in pilot scale or from kind of research and development type activities. But there are a lot of challenges to kind of bringing this to the scale it would need to be to kind of see the impacts on sustainability we'd like to see. And just to name a few of them, deployment of these types of techniques is often not cost effective today. It's hard to do at scale versus just on a sort of micro scale here and there on acres. And it's also often very difficult to measure or even sort of certify that you've successfully achieved the impacts with some of these practices. And in a certain sense, that's a key element of creating a market or an ecosystem where people can say, if I, the consumer, am willing to pay, 10% more for the food I consume, if it's 50% decarbonized, there's no right way for me to say, and I know that for a fact, or I know I'm paying for the right thing. But there's also always an element of future technological advancement, and we've listed out here a number of the different opportunities that you can think of as things that are not in today's technological horizon, but that we can either readily envision or sort of have line of sight towards. But we're not sort of seeing deployment today. And these types of technologies, and even technologies that we haven't thought of or haven't envisioned here, can certainly be a significant portion of what it takes to kind of get across the finish line in terms of sustainability. And you never know what the world will look like into the future, but it hopefully underscores the point that there's a lot of really exciting things that can be done, and opportunities to kind of improve what we're seeing in terms of sustainability for agricultural production. So I guess in summary, I'll just say that it's clear that proteins are critically important, both for us as people who need our diets to sustain us, as well as from a sustainability perspective, both in terms of climate change, water consumption, land use. And there's also a lot of reasons for us to be excited about the role Minnesota can play here in particular. Shannon's presentation shared a lot of reasons to be excited about kind of the concentration of businesses and agriculture here in Minnesota. And I'm really excited to see what the future looks like there. So I'm happy to hand things over to Joanne, who can talk a little bit more about MBOLD, which is the organization whose logo I think you've seen in the top right corner of most of our presentation pages here, and can share a little bit more about the role that they can and have been playing with respect to engaging in protein innovation.
Great. Thanks, Adam. Hi, everyone. So this is Joanne Berkenkamp. I'm pleased to be talking with you today. There we go. So that's me. And I'm excited to talk with you in particular about kind of like, okay, given the importance of the issue, given the many players who are working on this, kind of like what is MBOLD thinking about as we look at where to go in our future. So I wanted to start off and just tell you a little bit about who MBOLD is, because I'm guessing maybe some of you have heard of us, maybe others of you have not. So we're a coalition. We developed over a period of years when the CEOs of many of the companies that you see here got together and said, look, we are in relationship with one another. There's a certain amount of cross-pollination among us, but there are a lot of opportunities for us to collaborate in ways that we haven't yet realized, and to take on bigger challenges together than we are able to take on alone, despite the very large size of these organizations. And so that led to the CEOs of many of the companies you see here, the president of the university, McKinsey, Greater MSP, AORI, others forming this MBOLD coalition. And so it's a little bit different because it's really populated with CEOs and C-suite level leaders, so very high level people in these organizations. And it's also a little different because it's kind of unlike a situation where you've got a coalition that's formed by a nonprofit organization, for instance, that then tries to invite people in. This is really about executive leaders of these organizations coming together and saying, we want a place to collaborate. And that's what we are really about. And we are housed at the Greater Minneapolis-St. Paul Economic Development Partnership. So we're really focused on that economic development side of things. With the common thread for all these players you see here is that we're all headquartered in Minnesota, but for the companies, typically with national and global reach. So you can see our mission statement here. MBOLD accelerates solutions, by which I mean doing practical testing, piloting, and scaling of solutions to big challenges facing food and agriculture, particularly climate change and sustainability issues, and then these questions of how the world is really going to feed itself within planetary boundaries as global population moves toward 10 billion. Like really how is it going to work? So we've got 4 big pillars of work: advancing soil health and water stewardship, which is the agricultural piece of what we do, in conjunction with Forever Green, the Nature Conservancy, the Wilkin County Soil and Water Conservation District in the Red River Valley. We've got a body of work focused on packaging, which is to create a circular economy for flexible films like pallet wrap and hay bale wrap and single-use shopping bags here in the Upper Midwest. We've got a body of work that is led by AURI and Naturally Minnesota around catalyzing entrepreneurship through a Bold Growth Program. And then what we're talking with you about today is this new area of work for us around advancing protein sustainability. And so we've been doing a lot of kind of development around that for all the reasons that you've heard about why that's so important, to figure out kind of where might we go in that space. So you can see here, we've put together a team. On our left, our executive champion is Rick Gomez, who's the head of food and beverage for Target. And then Shannon McKinsey and I co-lead the effort. And then you can see our team members here on the right. And we're just, honored to have this level of protein expertise at the table with us to design our strategy and identify what we might be able to do that would be particularly useful in this space. And we started off by sort of really looking at what are the critical pain points for protein innovation in the direction of greater sustainability for both traditional proteins and some of the alternative proteins. And some of the pain points that really came out from our dialogue were in the first and second items here. You can see with alternative proteins, challenges around taste and texture that have inhibited consumer uptake for those alternatives, and also, the higher cost for alternative proteins, but also for more sustainable, meat and dairy, right? That often these shifts in practices come with costs, are challenges for farmers. Consumers have a reaction to that, et cetera. So cost is definitely a factor in advancing some of those innovations. Thirdly, there was a lot of interest in our group around the adoption of production practices and technologies that improve protein sustainability. And this is more on the farm and processing side of things, as you can see there. We also identified under 4 and 5 barriers around scaling to innovation, how to take good ideas and scale them up, how to attract more innovators to our community here in Minnesota, how to build our entrepreneurs and startups, how to bring in more capital, that whole piece around scaling. And then we also identified, a fair number of disconnects in our kind of business to business ecosystem. As Shannon referenced, we have so many assets here, so many businesses and commodity groups, trade groups, who are been active in this space for a long time. But a lot of it is kind of siloed. We might know each other, but that's not to say we're really actively collaborating to the degree that we might. And so we've started thinking more about how to deal with some of those disconnects. How can we support commercialization pathways and really leverage our assets in a more strategic way that could create, kind of a right to win sector around protein sustainability to a degree that we really haven't quite attempted to do before. This spring, we also held an event that was sponsored by Embold and AURI and the Canadian Consulate. Some of you might know Christina Connolly there. And we looked at kind of bringing together about 24 folks in the alternative protein space. About half of them were based outside the United States. So alternative protein businesses from Canada, Israel, the UK, the Netherlands, the Finns, et cetera, to really talk with them about kind of what are their aspirations in this space, and particularly for the foreign companies as they look to the United States and trying to expand their market presence in North America. This particular question that we addressed here, what are the decision factors that they have when they think about locating or expanding their alternative protein business? Like, what factors do they care about when they choose where to go? And the first one you can see here was geographic proximity to farm production and ingredient supply. And that is an area where Minnesota really excels, right? And so we're seeing, for instance, many of the food delegations that are coming from other countries, just about all of them want to talk about alternative proteins in Minnesota. right? And so that's very attractive. I mean, that's really an asset for us, and it has the potential to draw more innovation to us as a starting point for entry or expansion into the US market. The second piece you see here is access to talent. And that was a major decision factor for many of those foreign businesses in figuring out where do we want to be. And often those are quite technical skills that are needed in these alternative protein spaces. And I think it's an area where, Minnesota excels. I believe we continue to have the highest concentration of food scientists in the United States per capita. And that kind of thing is a real asset for us too. So Embold, after the work of our protein team, a lot of outreach with companies over the last couple of years, commodity groups and others, we've developed this ambition statement you can see here at the top, which is to build on our strength as a global leader in protein production to become a leading hub of innovation for innovation in protein sustainability. And that really has two prongs, both traditional proteins and alternative protein development. And we're looking now at a set of potential action strategies. I would say we're kind of, in the middle of this process. So one is building awareness of Minnesota as a leader in protein sustainability and innovation. We had that roundtable with foreign leaders. One of the things they told us is, and we've heard this before, Minnesota doesn't herald our strengths very well. We're like sometimes too humble. And we heard that again, that people were often aware of so much that we already have going here. We need to be more effective at sharing that. Improving access and really positioning Minnesota as a global destination for innovators by being a point of entry, by making it easier to get into our ecosystem, and then collaborating across state and international boundaries. And one of the things that we have heard from some of these foreign delegations who have come to town, and some of you may have been in some of those meetings, is, if you're from Minnesota, people, you can figure your way around. If you're not from here, Minnesota can be pretty hard to grok, to understand. There are a lot of players. It's hard to get started sometimes. And so we need to make it easier for innovators to figure out our ecosystem and figure out who to connect with. And then thirdly, driving innovation and scaling protein sustainability, technology and businesses. And that can happen simply through relationship building, through partnerships, through mentorships, all sorts of possibilities there around the protein value chain. And, with Embold, we're fundamentally a business coalition with the, very deep ties with the university and AURI and other innovators, the Agri-Growth Council and others, and really thinking about how we can be helpful in spurring that kind of connectivity to drive innovation. So as I say, we're kind of at midstream in this. We've got more formation to do. We've got some next steps here we're focusing on, which is really to do a lot of outreach to potential allies and partners to align on, what are other folks doing? What are your aspirations? How can we collaborate, help a lot of boats rise together? And where might there be particular channels for collaboration? Be looking at resource needs and then prioritizing particular action strategies as we move into execution. And then finally, as Embold thinks about how we can try to do something that, lifts a lot of boats and maybe adds some unique value, we see the potential for benefit in these three areas. Sustainability benefits through driving innovation in protein sustainability. Actually, driving that kind of innovation on the ground with some of the opportunities that Adam and Shannon both flagged, with things that can really move the needle from a sustainability standpoint, as well as economic benefit through business attraction, helping innovative businesses scale up, and the development of an economic cluster in a more deliberate way around protein sustainability. And then lastly, heightening our reputation for leadership in protein sustainability and the good things that are already happening and that can happen in the future. And that really is focused on increasing visibility and recognition of Minnesota as a go-to place for innovation. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. Again, I would say it's a work in progress, but it's an exciting time for Embold. We're thinking about how we can do something, unique that really builds on the amazing work that is happening at multiple levels here in Minnesota, and that has that potential for national and global impact. So with that, I will hand it back to Dan and we'll engage in some conversation. We welcome your questions.
All right, thanks so much, Joanne and Adam, Shannon, for getting us started. And now the important part of the day is when we invite you who are participating in this webinar to get a hold of us and let us know what you're thinking and push back if you want to. And Adam, we're going to start with you. I don't know if you peeked at the questions a little bit, but there's a couple that are around your presentation and your project, asking, are you comfortable with the metrics to measure greenhouse gas are robust and relevant to modern agriculture? You seem to drift between numbers, especially regarding emissions. Is it a cause for concern? You want to respond to that?
Absolutely. I mean, I won't deny that measuring greenhouse gas emissions is a challenging problem. I mentioned, I think at one point that there's definitely the opportunity to try and figure out how we can link local actions to actual outcomes. And by doing that, help create maybe a marketplace for helping consumers or other interested parties like pay for sustainable practices. But on the kind of direct measurement front, I mean, we know every acre is a little bit different: soil, microbes, temperature, sunlight, any number of variables impacting any individual acre of land, either growing crops or supporting animal agriculture. So, I mean, I wouldn't apply the numbers that we've shared to every single individual acre and say it must be the case. They're going to be some higher and some lower. But broad strokes, I am comfortable with the FAO numbers that we shared today, and I would consider them relatively robust. But it's also important to make sure that we're always kind of speaking the same language on some of these things. I mentioned that, you know, methane is significantly more potent as a greenhouse gas compared to carbon dioxide. But it's also a lot shorter lived. So sometimes people talk about sort of the 20-year climate change impact versus the 100-year climate change impact. And that definitely changes the number you might see. It's just maybe a different like framing or a different perspective. But it doesn't give me a reason to kind of doubt the overall picture. Although, of course, there are going to be fluctuations along the way.
And if you'd like to ask a question, you are muted, but you can write your question into our Q&A portal. Adam, I'm going to keep you there since we've got you on the screen. There's a whole range of microbiological approach for reduction of GHG that is not mentioned in your research. This leverages soil bacteria to move agricultural waste to the soil. Any response to that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely correct. There are any number of techniques and options and opportunities that are sort of not listed in the presentation, partially for brevity and partially because the world of opportunities is so large, right? I would maybe put that in the category of exciting kind of technological advancements that I'm really looking forward to seeing, you know, continue to improve and be deployed locally and, you know, across the globe. And I certainly wasn't intending to say, you know, here's a list of things that we've seen. This is the list, right? The best options across the board. And as Joanne and Shannon will know from any number of the conversations we've had amongst ourselves or with any number of Embold companies, the list of ideas is quite long. And that's, at least from my perspective, a very good reason to be optimistic and excited about kind of the future of what this could all hold.
You haven't finalized the final list yet?
Yeah, I don't think we've put the pin in the exact solution as of yet.
I'm going to leave this one open to all three of you, whoever wants to weigh in. What role do you see data, AI, machine learning playing in the protein sustainability? Apart from things like precision agriculture, do you see any other applications for that technology?
I think maybe I'll just jump in on some broad thoughts. I mean, data is critical, right, as we look at this in terms of making informed decisions and moving forward. I think AI is going to touch us in so many different ways. I think of some of the work that even breeding companies are doing today, right, around using artificial intelligence and large data sets and machine learning to, you know, get better at selections and different traits and, right, how we look at that from the input side of different crops and getting what's desired, right, for those next steps. So I know there's work going on in that space overall. And I think of, right, there's a lot of genetic companies, right, focused on you know, across the board as well in terms of looking at, you different species, or how do they, be more efficient overall, or what does that mean in terms of the footprint? So I think there's just a lot of opportunities there as we look forward. I don't have in terms of what specifics there are there, but definitely I think that will come into play well beyond precision agriculture.
Joanne or Adam, anything to add to that?
No,
Yeah,
I would just, go ahead, Adam.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say a few ideas. And first, let's not undersell sort of the impact on precision agriculture, right? And both looking at that kind of locally and from a big picture. I do think that as there's more data and more AI in place, we're going to see a lot more anticipation of demand, or basically prediction of different things. Maybe if you know that certain crop illnesses or disease are more likely to hit your acres this year versus the year after, you can change which crop protection strategies you use, or maybe you can figure out local demand for certain products and help shift the world towards the kind of local supply chains that Joanne had been mentioning in some of her presentations. But in the same way as we don't have the final list on suggestions, I think the opportunity for AI is basically limitless, and I would hate to put a pin in the list of ideas there as well, given that my crystal ball is not quite that good.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would just add, I think the question is just reflective of the fact that the reality in the protein space and in various areas of food and agriculture, I mean, things are changing so rapidly. Things are possible now that were impossible 3 years ago in terms of data processing, right? And that will probably continue to change and accelerate as AI comes into play. And so we're kind of dealing in this world of possibility and uncertainty, and we're also seeing at the same time where is capital moving, where consumer preference is moving. Can we make plant proteins taste better and not make your smoothie gritty? I mean, there's so many levels of innovation that need to happen to make these things work in the marketplace. And I think part of the magic needs to be how to bring these increasing technical capabilities to bear in a way that effectively deals with market opportunities and market barriers. And then you need all of that, the productive capability, the middle of the supply chain, all of that working in concert. And that's, I think, why this work is particularly challenging and full of potential too.
And Joanne, while I've got you here, I just think the work that Embold is doing is so important after so many years of not really letting us look behind the curtain at these companies. Now they're sitting down and having some real conversations. So is Embold looking to grow? Are you looking for new voices, new members, or are you kind of where you want to be?
Yeah, so given the complexity of these issues, and protein is only one of them that we deal with, partnership is the name of the game. And it will be that in the protein space too. And so, yes, we are looking at who wants to partner with us in this arena. How can we form combinations of folks working together in ways that are really strategic and that add value for everyone involved? So very much so. And relative to looking behind the curtain, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that Embold has done is worked with AURI and Naturally Minnesota on the creation of the Bold Growth Program. And that was for us a way of saying, how do we help our entrepreneurs? Big companies and little companies need each other. There are a lot of organizations out there that help entrepreneurs. What does Embold bring that's unique? And what we felt was what we bring that's unique is our members, and it's access to those, big companies, to, leaders at General Mills and Schwann's and Cargill and Target and, partners, 3M, Hormel, others. How can we sort of open the door for these smaller businesses to big businesses? And we're excited that we've been able to kind of open that door up and give those participating small businesses a window into the expertise of those big companies. So, we're always looking for how do we engage in ways that really can be most helpful to the ecosystem writ large.
We have another question coming out of our Q&A portal, but Shannon, I'm going to set it up by asking you a question about one of the slides you showed us, where we would need 60% more food, I think it was, by 2050. Of that 60% more food, how much of it is going to be protein? Did they break that down?
Yeah, great question. So right in the slide, or in the narrative, right, it was 2x to 4x more protein is going to be needed of that overall caloric intake, right? overall. So it's a big number. I don't have the exacts right, Dan, to share with you, but just as we look at that in terms of what's growing the most in terms of caloric demand and caloric need, protein is outsized, right? In terms of we think about that curve, right? In terms of how it increases. You know, we've done pretty well on carbohydrates, I would say, from an innovation standpoint, and the work that's being done there is think about the yields on cereal grains and things that have gone right, moved forward in terms of productivity. Proteins have been just a little bit more challenging, or this is more complex, I would say, overall. But as we think about that growth curve, think of just a growing segment of that being protein, right, versus versus the other elements that we're going to need.
I'm going to move to two questions then about other proteins, and anybody can answer this one that wants to. So many higher protein crops, and they list lentils and dry beans, but I know we can all come up with others as well, are not dominant in Minnesota. How can they be made more attractive in terms of a return on investment for the producer? Maybe need a University of Minnesota scientist to tell us that one. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start in, and then maybe John and Adam want to jump in as well. I mean, I think of the work that we're doing on emerging crops, right? And really, it is creating that market pull. I think is absolutely critical, right? As we look at what are the opportunities, right, for new market expansion of different protein crops, right? How can we work together of looking at that in terms of an ingredient use or right into different products and working with the value chain partners to really create that pull for those different crops. And I know I think of partnering with a lot of the research and promotion councils and looking at value added opportunities and right just aligning, I think, on what are those most successful opportunity areas, and then creating those partnerships and collaborations to really move it forward. I think similar to what Joanne mentioned in terms of partnerships, the name of the game, and I think that's how we could work together to really try to move some of those opportunities as well. And the other piece I'll mention is right, there's always a risk element, right, of switching to what so are there incentives or other ways right to help modify that and move that forward, right, in terms of just creating that lessening that burden, right, of making that trial in terms of trying a new crop. But I think what you need though is that market and that pull, and how can we work together, right, to start thinking about that value chain, that supply chain, and mitigating those risks, right, of those different crops, of moving them forward.
And I think history tells us that the producer, the farmer, when he sees a return on investment, will go in that direction if the seed is there. And
yeah,
so
exactly. Well said.
I don't know what's needed next, Adam or Joanne, but somehow we got to show the farmer that there is a return on investment that's worthy to chase.
No, I mean, absolutely. The thing I find myself reminding people is, farms are businesses, right? I mean, they need to know that the agronomy works and that the market is there, and that any sort of, changes, there's risk management in place, right? So that it's a sensible business decision for them, of course. And so, you look at, your favorite, protein crop, like fava beans, the market is pretty darn small, right? So, farmers would want to see that there's market development for that. At Embold, we think about, is, that or lentils or, any of, long string, where is the market potential to expand some of those things? How do they fit into, for instance, the adoption of more regenerative agriculture practices, longer rotations, cover crops, that kind of thing? How could these pieces fit together from an agronomic perspective? And then how do you manage the kind of market opportunity and de-risking opportunities? And one example I would give is that in our soil health space, we've been working for several years with Forever Green and some of our members around winter camelina as a cover crop to really advance soil health and water stewardship. And you're talking about a couple hundred acres. I mean, it is very small. There's work to be done in the agronomy, given the impact on soy yields declining because of the kind of intersecting of how it would be grown. So there's agronomy work that needs to be done, and there's market development work that needs to be done. Mainly, initially, I think in the biofuel space, that's the low-hanging fruit. Also possibilities for the meal with animal feed. And so we're just really kind of working on figuring out how can you move those pieces together so you get the agronomy and the market development going simultaneously and the risk management piece happening at the same time. And that, that's, part art and part science, right? But that's the kind of thing we're trying to make possible.
And from our Q&A portal, kind of a follow-up to all of that, do you have any ideas for marketing the sustainability of different proteins? Labels and certification can be confusing and not always reliable, as they say, as Adam pointed out earlier in his presentation.
Who wants to start? I'll just say I have some doubts about more certifications because I think consumers are just confused. And I think they don't like long ingredient lists, and that's something that needs to be addressed in product development efforts.
Adam, did your research touch on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is a tricky problem. I think we've got a fair bit of evidence that says that consumers are willing to consider and incorporate sustainable products and goods into their lives, but they don't like feeling tricked, and they don't like making major trade-offs between sustainable choices and other things. Not to say that it won't be more expensive and people aren't willing to pay a so-called green premium for products, but they don't like, as Jordan pointed out, looking at the back of the label and saying, what is this? Like, what am I eating? I want a clean label. I want to be eating healthy, and I don't see why I have to trade that with being sustainable or eating something else. And I don't understand why this has to taste worse than whatever else I'm eating, or I'm unwilling to accept that. I'll pay more, but it better taste good, right? So not to say I've got the silver bullet answer to the marketing there, but there's a lot of work to be done on getting the products there, getting consumers to trust them. And I also agree with Joanne, it probably isn't another certification on top.
Adam, I'm just going to ask you, I always like to have the backs of the producers a little bit, and they are really positioned, I think, to be a part of the solution. How would you react to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good way of phrasing a lot of what Shannon and Joanne had shared on the previous question about kind of creating new markets and making sure that we've bridged the gaps between people who want to help and people who might need some sort of new cover crop or willing to figure out a way to use it. And that too is really hard work, bringing a lot of people together, making sure that people know that there are others interested in the same topics and willing to work on some kind of compromise or mutual solution in place. But I think you're exactly right, Dan. Producers are not the problem in this situation, right? They're businesses, as Joanne says, and they're more than willing to do their part in kind of pulling us forward here. But they can't do it by themselves. They can't do it if there's no market. They can't do it if no one's willing to help.
I've got one more for you, Adam, and then we'll go around the room for some final comments. But you put up a slide with 7 categories to help reduce emissions. If we were going to pick 1 or 2 to focus on or invest in, through your research, did you find 1 or 2 that are critical to get started on or to advance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I don't know that I will answer it as directly as people might like. And the reason for that is in different areas, in different regions, there are going to be different sets of low-hanging fruit. And to suggest a sort of one-size-fits-all buckets for the best or the most urgent solutions is probably a bit disingenuous. But I know that there are a lot of people working on exciting things. And for example, like the animal feed world, no one is going to say no to improved animal health and productivity. Some of the enablers along the way. All that to say, not going to say, here's my rubber stamp on 3 or 4 of these options that are the best, but I think it's going to be a lot of different solutions deployed in different ways in different places.
Well, it's already 2023, so I'm going to go around the room and ask our 3 participants how we get some goals figured out by 2050. Shannon, you kicked us off this afternoon from AURI's perspective or Embold's perspective. What does the future look like? What do you want to leave our participants with today?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. It's been great to be part of the discussion today. And again, thank you to Adam and Joanne for participating and sharing thoughts and insights. So what I'm really excited about is this collaborative approach overall that we're embarking down and thinking about the great things that are already happening here in terms of how do we better come together to accelerate that and forge those synergies. But then also really taking this in-depth look on this topic and identifying, are there gaps, right, that collectively we still need to fill, and how do we create those relationships and partnerships and collaborations to really move this forward. I think again, we've got a great opportunity here, right, Minnesota in the region, to be that global epicenter for protein. I mean, we're seeing it. We're getting requests from around the world to talk about protein. Let's take this opportunity and run with it, and really be that place where ideas come and scaling happens, and we really make an impact on this protein space and feeding the world, and doing it in a way that we can be proud of.
And Adam, you got it second today, so I'll turn it over to you for final thoughts. What do you want to leave them with?
Absolutely. And I'll keep it relatively brief here. I think the biggest piece for me is always about optimism, I think. And there's a lot of reasons to believe that despite the challenges, despite how much work needs to be done and how much work each individual element of all of this represents, that we're making progress, and there's a lot of potential here, not just to kind of undo environmental damage moving forward, but to think about new markets and new opportunities that can help provide economic growth along with environmental benefits. And that piece is what I typically hang on to, and saw very strong threads of it throughout everyone's presentation here and a lot of the questions. So appreciate that and really enjoyed the time here.
Joanne, final comments?
Sure. Well, I think Shannon and Adam nailed it. And I just look forward to staying in conversation with everybody here today about how we move forward together in this really critical area. Thank you for your attention today.
Thank you. That concludes AURI Connect's webinar Wednesday for today. And I do want to thank Shannon Schlecht, Adam Matula, and Joanne Berkenkamp for joining us today. AURI Connect's webinar Wednesday is presented by the Agricultural Utilization Research Institute of Minnesota. AURI's mission is to foster long-term economic benefit for Minnesota through value-added agricultural products and processes. We are interested in your feedback, so please respond when we send you our event evaluation. And remember, you can go for more information on today's program or any of the work that AURI is involved with by going to auri.org. Now, our webinar Wednesday is back on a regular schedule as we transition to the fall. The second in this three-part series will be held October 11th, when we focus on what is happening in the plant and alternative protein space. And then in November, efforts related to animal proteins, including meat, dairy, and eggs, will be highlighted. These topical webinars will include lessons learned and will aim to inspire action and investment in the sustainable protein space. And you can always learn more about other work that AURI is involved with by going online to auri.org. We are looking forward to having you join us again in October for another AURI Connects webinar Wednesday.